Hello, and welcome everyone to the 2021 Ohioana Book Festival. I'm Kathryn Powers, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to this panel, Spotlight on Middle Grade. If this blue shirt gave you any clues, and it's a little hard to see because I'm kind of short, but I am part of the Ohioana team. I am the Ohioana Library Office Manager. Additionally, outside of Ohioana, I'm also the regional advisor for the Central and Southern Ohio chapter of the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. So I absolutely love Kidlit and am very excited to be moderating this panel of talented middle grade authors today. So before we get started, we'd like to thank our festival sponsors and partners, all of whom you can find listed on the Ohioana website. And thanks also to our official bookseller, the Book Loft of German Village. You can get copies of all the books featured at the festival and on this panel by going online to bookloft.com. And now I'm pleased to welcome our panelist authors, Jenn Bishop, Gary Bittner, Doug Coates, Jason R. Lady, and Tara Tyler. So for some quick introductions, Jenn Bishop is the author of the middle grade novels Where We Used to Roam, Things You Can't Say, 14 Hollow Road, and The Distance to Home. She grew up in Massachusetts and as a college student spent one incredible summer in Wyoming. She has been obsessed with bison ever since. After working as a children's librarian, she received her MFA in Writing for Children and Young Adults from the Vermont College of Fine Arts. Jenn currently calls Cincinnati, Ohio home. Gary Bittner has been writing spooky stories since junior high, but he's been making up his own superheroes and stories since he was a little kid. Once, he even won a 10-speed bike by making up his own superhero for a contest on the back of a cereal box. Bittner studied creative writing in college at Indiana University, where he won awards for his stories. Doug Coates lives in Hamilton, Ohio, Joe Nuxhall's hometown. He is a current board member and past treasurer of the Joe Nuxhall Miracle League and the author of Pitching for Success and Riley's Winning Catch. Doug has brought into each book his experiences as both a baseball and softball coach for over 20 years. Besides writing, he enjoys watching baseball, softball, collegiate and pro football, and he also loves researching ancestry and family histories. So, Jason R. Lady is an Army brat who grew up moving around a total of 7 times on military bases from Germany to Fort Knox, Kentucky. From a family of avid readers, Jason was encouraged to read fantasy and science fiction and write his own stories and comic strips from an early age. He's the author of the Magic Pen Adventure series. When he's not writing, Jason works in human resources and enjoys 1980s music and popular culture, watching Marvel movies, working on visiting all the MLB baseball stadiums, and following the Cleveland Indians. He lives in Cleveland, Ohio. And last but certainly not least, we have Tara Tyler. And Tara has a hand in everything from waitressing to rocket engineering. After moving all over the US, she now writes and teaches math in Ohio with her husband and one boy left in the nest. She has 2 novel series, Pop Travel, which is a sci-fi detective thriller series, and Beast World, which are fantasy adventures, plus her Unprincess novella series where the damsels save themselves. She's a commended blogger, contributed to several anthologies, and to fit all of these projects in, she economizes her time, aka the lazy housewife. Some days she might write a book on that, make every day an adventure. So we were talking before we got started about how fun all of these bios are, which says a lot about this age group. It's just such a fun age group and such fun people writing it. So let's get started. And to get us our conversation going, can you all tell us a little about your book festival title? And we'll start with Jenn.
My book festival title is Where We Used to Roam. And the main character gets sent to Wyoming after a pretty crazy 6th grade year, where she sort of tries to reinvent herself with the new artist friends she makes, but in the process, she rejects her longtime best friend. And while that's all happening, her older brother develops an addiction to opioid painkillers. So when we get to the midpoint of the book, which is also the beginning of the book, her parents send her to Wyoming, where she sort of faces all these things that have happened and tries to figure out who she is and what are the things that she can control of what's going on and how to move forward. So that's Where We Used to Roam.
Wonderful. And Gary, if you'd like to tell us about your book festival title.
Yeah. It's the fourth book in the Monster Pet series. And the Monster Pet series is about this girl named Mina who wants to go to summer camp for the summer, to zoo camp. And to earn the money to go to camp, she pet sits the pets of famous monsters. And she has adventures with Dracula's cat and alien slime and the Headless Horseman's horse. But in the fourth book, she actually finally gets to go to camp. And it doesn't exactly turn out the way she expected it to be. And it's the sort of big slam bang ending to the series. Sadly, a little sadly, but I think it was a lot of fun. So Zoo Creepers.
Excellent. And I'm sure you've got something up your sleeve next, so we'll get to that later. But next we'll go to Doug.
Thanks, Kathryn. Riley's Winning Catch, Good Character Prevails. It's the second book in a series of what I call character development books. Largely fictional, but in both cases based on a little bit of nonfiction. Riley is a young teenager who just loves softball. She enjoys watching the local recreational team play. And she's watched them for the last 2 years, unbeknownst to her parents. And she would really love to be on a team, but she's also very afraid of rejection and being teased because Riley has Down syndrome and her skills are not the same as other girls. But she does find a very compassionate coach who spends her time coaching the players on character as well as softball. And she invites Riley, and Riley gets to play 1 year. And Riley soon learns about the Miracle League, but that's a special organization for children and adults with special needs. And so you'll have to read Riley and find out what the Winning Catch is all about.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Jason.
Thanks, Kathryn. My book is Super Problems. And like Kathryn said in the introduction, it is one in a series. The series is the Magic Pen Adventures. And each one of these is about a middle schooler with a magic pen where everything they draw with it becomes real. It's a different middle schooler in each book getting the magic pen. And it's one of those loosely connected series. You could read them in any order you want. There's just some characters that kind of float between the books, some common threads, some common themes. But other than that, you could read them in whatever order. This particular one, Super Problems, is about a middle schooler who draws his friends as superheroes before he knows this pen is magical. And they all become superheroes, much to their shock. And they're thrown right into a superhero adventure unexpectedly. And it's a fun, crazy, funny story, lots of humor in it. There's a talking alpaca. The villain is a stinky sock who's building a sock army by drawing a sock from every pair of socks in the town. And he's after the alpaca for his magic wool. So there's just a lot of zany stuff in it. So if you like fun adventure stories with superheroes, Super Problems might interest you.
Wonderful. That sounds super fun. And Tara.
So I went through a process of republishing, and so I am featuring my Broken Branch Falls, the Beast World Book 1, which I've actually republished all of them now. So I've got Broken Branch Falls and Cradle Rock and Windy Hollow, and it's about teenage fantasy creatures in high school. So everybody has, all of us have been in high school and been in cliques and know how it can get very trying and you don't always fit in with everyone. And so each fantasy creature is a kind of a, like the goblins are the nerds and they play in the band and they're really smart. But that's just a stereotype because the main character wants to branch out and he wants to try some sports. Even though he's kind of scrawny, he still wants to try, and he actually does do, and he also wants to try pulling some pranks like the Pixies do, and gets in trouble and ends up bringing havoc from everyone so that the town is in trouble. So he and all of his mixed up group of friends have to set out to find a way to save their town. And so a bunch of adventures with the quirky skills that they all have and getting along.
Wonderful. So thank you all so much for telling the audience about your books. As you can all see, middle grade is a just fun and diverse genre and age group. We have, a very well-rounded group here. We've got some on the contemporary fiction side of things, on more serious topics, but you can also have, just goofy, quirky, silly things as well. And we got some spooky here too. So it's fun to get a sampling of all the different things that are in the middle grade world. So to move on to our second question, I've heard authors say at workshops, conferences, and panels just like this one that there's something magical about writing middle grade books. Why are you all drawn to writing for this age group? And we started with Jenn last time, so let's go to Gary Bittner this time.
Oh, good. I won't have any time to think of an answer. It's actually funny because I mentioned before we were talking that I started out doing horror, and I was publishing horror short stories and anthologies and stuff. And I had been working on a novel and it kind of stalled. And but my daughter, who was actually here before helping with the electronics, who's 15 now, I think she was 7. And I was watching a lot of My Little Pony, Monster High, iCarly, and there was just this energy to it. And when horror fans have seen it all and have become completely immune to everything, and middle grade, you still have that wonder of like, is she going to survive? Like, this is book 1 of a 10-book series. Is Harry Potter going to die in that first book? It really seems like he might. And there's just this great energy, and what I call comedy logic, where it's still logic. It still makes sense from thing to thing, but you can have these sort of gorgeous leaps of logic. And I just love that in a story. And there's something about being able to play with these archetypes for people who have not seen it all yet. And not like rehashing old crap, but it's new to them. And I think that's just a wonderful thing.
I love it. That's a great way of looking at it. Doug, how about you?
Well, I'll tell you, my motivation for going down this path of character development has largely been my association with the Joe Nuxhall Miracle League. And I happened on this organization in its infancy. And as I watched this develop and the the players come out to play, I realized that there was something unique about this age group. First of all, they all had special needs. They were physically disabled, things like that. And I sort of just kind of grew into this grade group. Once I determined that I was going to write that first book, Pitching for Success, it was about a 5th grade boy and some of his problems on and off the field, largely due to self-confidence. And his coach, who was his dad, also started to tell him some stories about Joe Nuxhall, who's a very real person. And my motivation came from Joe also. In later years, Joe would also go into the classroom and share some of his stories and teach the kids about character. He was very concerned that kids need to be ingrained as early as possible about good sportsmanship, good decision-making, good character. And so that motivation drew me to stay with that age group. And I largely grew into it even more writing the second book, Riley's Winning Catch, through my classroom presentations. And I found that I love these kids. They're very curious. They love to read. And part of my presentation is encouraging more reading and more writing. And I always tell them, and I firmly believe this, but I always tell them that I learn something from them every time, and that I hope that they walk away with something, and I do learn something from them. And it's very fascinating. And so I think they don't have too many presets at this age, and they're very open. And so I think we've all experienced this. It's amazing when you start to let them ask you questions, just where their minds go. A lot of them want to know how much money you made. A lot of them want to know how old you are. What that has to do with anything, I don't know. but you see their wheels spinning. And I guess it's just that motivation. And so I plan to go with this series for a little bit and see how it goes. I am working on a third one. So
wonderful. I love that saying that they're curious and they're, quite the little readers. They just like to, voraciously eat all the books up. So that's
yeah, they absorb.
Yes,
So.
little sponges too, for sure. So, Jason, how about you? You even have magic in the title or the series title for your book. So,
yeah, it's a magical group for me to write for. It really kind of gets my sweet spot, and that is kind of the intersection of storytelling that can be sophisticated enough where there's plot development, character development, a plot with certain sophistication, a number of characters. So I really like writing a story that has all those elements in it. But then also, I like to laugh. I like to be silly and goofy. I like to write goofy stories with silly elements in them. And I think it's the intersection of both of those things where the middle grade reader is. They're not too old where they don't appreciate the silliness. People get older and they get to the point where that's just kid stuff, that's silly stuff. I'm not going to be interested in that anymore. And, they get old and kind of really serious. And, with the middle grade reader, they're still right there with you with the silliness, but they're ready to intake a story that has a certain sophistication. It's beyond the picture books, beyond the stuff for smaller kids. So I think that's really where the sweet spot is for me. The silliness and the humor, but with the sophistication of storytelling, you can meld those together and create something for them.
Wonderful, thank you. And Tara?
Yeah, so I have 3 boys, and them and my students are so inspirational to me. I see characters in them all the time because they are a bunch of characters. And the inspiration for my Beast World series was when I would go to my son's football practices. The littlest guy on his football team would knock the biggest guys down. And that was my inspiration for breaking the mold. And that's don't let anybody tell you can't do things is kind of like my theme for these books, is like, you can do whatever you want to do. You can at least give it a try. And so don't let anybody tell you can't. And those I also started writing for them because I wanted to inspire more boys to read, because my boys just were not big readers. And so there's a lot of action, a lot of adventure, a lot of comedy, hopefully to get them to read. But there's also that little message, sprinkled throughout, so that they can learn a little bit from it too. So that's one of the main reasons that I write.
Thank you. And Jenn?
Part of the reason I think I write for this age is that's the age where I really fell in love with books that deal with big emotions. I feel like I always want to get deep. I feel like I'm a little bit of an outlier in this panel because my book is kind of more serious. So I think kids at that age, like, they can be like goofing off one minute and then sharing really deep thoughts the next minute. And like, that's what I love. I used to be a teen librarian, and at my last job that included 6th grade, and I got a lot of 6th graders. And they just really opened my eyes to just what's going on. Their lives are so multifaceted, but they're at an age where they're making sense of the world. A lot of the adult world is trickling down into ways that they absorb, whereas they might have been sort of not paying attention to that beforehand. So I really love exploring that in my books.
Wonderful. Yes, and even with the series, we see a little cattail over there.
A little cattail.
I was wondering what it was at first.
I was
thought it was a finger.
A very furry caterpillar in the corner.
Yeah,
I thought he was making a point.
Yes.
Unimportant.
Point of order.
You guys video bombed us.
The kitty's pearl.
Oh, what a sweetie. But what I was going to say with Jenn and Doug with the more serious topics is that you still in middle grade see a lot of the more tones of hopefulness in them as well. That's a very big thing for the middle grade age group. And once you start getting a little older, that the books they don't have to have a happy ending or be filled with that sort of hopeful message in the end, but middle grade still.
I'm still trying to emotionally recover from Charlotte's Web.
Yes.
47,
right?
I'm like almost there.
Fair.
I feel like any day now I'm going to be.
Wonderful.
recover from
But I
that.
feel like
Yeah.
all my books might make you cry, but I definitely feel like I always try to have a lot of humor in them as well. Like it's not one note.
Well, they have it in their lives. It's like they're up and down.
Yeah.
Humor and heart, that is two words you hear a lot in the middle grade writing sphere. So our next question, and I'm really excited about this one because I've actually never been able to ask this question on a panel before, because this is not the first rodeo for any of you. And all of you have published more than one book. So yay, that is something big to celebrate in itself. But everyone always talks about what it's like to write and publish your debut novel. But what about your second book and beyond? Are there any challenges you didn't expect, or does it get easier with each new book you write? And I know some of you, if you want to talk a little bit about, series, because some of you are writing series versus like Jenn, you've written standalones. So would love to hear some of your thoughts on that. I will, since I did Jenn, Gary, I will go to Doug first this time.
Sounds good.
Sure.
I think with I got a little bit spoiled after publishing the first book. A lot of things fell into order that I didn't necessarily have control over or see coming. And I was actually approached by a publisher to publish the book. And so I got a little bit spoiled by that. And it was a very traditional contract, and it's worked out well. I just learned a lot from it. But when I started my second book, Riley's Winning Catch, discussing it with the publisher a little bit, I realized it wasn't going to be in their bailiwick to publish. And the large reason that they published the first one is because they like a lot more historical Cincinnati, Ohio-based type of events. And so that's why they had Joe in mind. So with that in mind, it became a bit of a challenge. Well, it was a challenge to find a publisher for the second book. So once I got the complete book written and so forth, I started researching publishers. And then I came across an idea one day. A publisher down in Georgia had published a book about a Down syndrome person here in Ohio. And so I just wrote a very crafty email inquiry to them saying, hey, I'm aware of this book. I've read it. I love it. Would you be interested in mine? And I just immediately got input from him. And so we went with that. And it's a very much hybrid arrangement. But that became one of the stressful challenges to overcome at that point. As far as writing subsequent books, I know I challenge myself and make it a little bit stressful to try and make it even better than the last. And the thing I have to catch myself often is I may get into a stream of consciousness and writing and storytelling and so forth. And then I have to step back and realize, okay, is this interesting to the reader? I kind of have to have somebody read it from their perspective. And are they going to enjoy it, or are they going to yawn? And so I sometimes get caught up in the moment of writing and really have to realize what it is I'm doing and try and stay focused. And that's about really what I can say on that at this point. So.
And you have a lovely comment from somebody in the chat as well that says they are so glad you found a publisher for Riley's Winning Catch, and that we definitely need this type of diversity in literature.
Oh, great. Thank you.
And yes, do feel free, everybody in the attendance, to chat, to pop any questions for the panelists. We will do a Q&A section here shortly. Or any comments for the authors as well. Feel free to pop them in the chat. And we also have a Q&A button as well if you prefer that. So Jason, we'll go to you next.
Sure. So when the first book was published, this is my second book. When the first book was published, I was thrilled. I was so excited. But I was also really scared and really freaked out. Our work's really important to us. You're caring a lot about what is the cover going to look like, what's the process going to be. And so the second time around, I was a lot more chill, thankfully. And I knew the process my publisher went through, and I saw good results, the first time, working with the cover illustrator, figuring out, things like what the cover would look like, and was able the second time around, like I said, just to be more relaxed with all of it. And really have a lot more comfort with what to do, including the book marketing and promotion kinds of things. I was like, okay, the stuff I did the first time around, I can do the second time around too, and I won't waste time on the things that didn't work. But I can also, keep doing the things that did work out, maybe, try some new things as well. And as far as like writing in a series, you mentioned that, Kathryn. For me, I made it harder on myself because the second book actually takes place before the first one. It's a prequel, and there's a character that is in both stories, and I had to make sure that the things she knows are consistent. And there's all these rules around how the magic pen that's in both stories works. And I had to make that consistent because I'm like, I know that the kids that read these books, they're going to catch me if I don't get one of these things right. I would have when I was a kid. I was reading comic books and pointing out all the things that weren't consistent. And I was like, the kids are going to notice this. So there was a lot of work and a lot of anxiety on my part, just kind of getting the details right. And I'm sure there's probably something else in there that's no one caught and that they'll catch. But yeah, I'd say those were the big things with the second book. There's more confidence and but yeah, kind of sweating getting the details to jibe with the first one.
You did make that extra tricky for yourself, doing an origin story after the first one. So
yeah, I don't know why I did that to myself. Like, why did I make it harder on myself?
But I'm sure it's really fun for readers.
Writers are masochists.
Yes, that's right. How can I make this more difficult? Yeah, like a challenge, I guess. Yeah,
for sure. Tara, how about you?
Well, I always find that, well, first of all, writing a series helps your sales, because when they buy one and they like it, they'll buy the next ones, and so you want to keep going with it. And I have several series going on here, and my Pop Travel series, that's what my first book, and those write themselves because the characters are hilarious. They're very intense. And then the same thing with the Broken Branch series. I didn't know if I was going to be able to write another book that would be an interesting story, because the first story was, I just was so vivid to me. So writing more books with the same characters, you want to make juicy storylines so that they're still interesting and not the same old thing happens to them every time. So that's a hard thing. But it works out. It works out. The other thing about writing a second book, I keep when Jason said about keeping everything straight, I have Excel spreadsheets to make sure my timelines work out, because that is definitely and names. I don't want to reuse old names, and I want to make sure I spell all the names right. And so yeah, it's definitely important to keep all that straight. But it is really fun to write a series. I didn't think Pop Travel was going to be a series, but my nephew, he was very into it, and he was like, I want you to write another one, Aunt Tara. So it just happened, and that's it's really, I think writing a series is good, but writing the standalones are good too. So I love both types myself, and I think they're plus once you get a name, they'll want to read more of whatever you write. So it's really helpful.
Thank you. That's great. And Jen, how about you?
My books are all standalone, so I feel like each book, and they're all standalone. They're all first person point of view. So each time I start, I have to try. I'm starting all over in every way. I'm obviously carrying overall craft lessons that I continue to learn. But I do feel like each book takes its own journey. And so I guess I noticed less differences in the publishing experience and more differences in the writing experience. And then I think the more that I write, I probably revise each book more. Like, I think I revised this around the 9th draft. I completely rewrote the book, restructured things, took out characters. That version was very different than the final version. And I think my biggest challenge still is every time I start a new project, making sure that my characters are truly distinct from not just the other characters in that book, but all the characters in the books that I've written beforehand. So hearing Tara talk about an Excel sheet, I think I'm at the point working on my 5th book where I wish I had, or maybe I should just do this, read through my old books and write down all of the names of anybody named in all of my books, because you sort of draw some parts of names from real life a little bit occasionally. And so it's just getting a little unwieldy to actually remember everyone I've created in my books, because they're not operating in the same universe. I to duplicate things. But yeah.
And I
It
also
wouldn't be writing a book with heart. I don't think. Like, I think writers are masochists. Like, I think there are parts that are wonderful and that are like very flow state moments. But it's work. It's definitely work.
For sure. Since you are writing the standalones, I know I always also hear writers kind of talk about that sometimes it just takes a different process for them by each book too. Have you found that to be true with that? Actually, as well with the series too, if it kind of takes a different, thought process to really get in there. Is that something you've experienced, Jen, or do you kind of have your plotter or pantser sort of attitude you go in with?
Someone talked about books being seeds or lightning bolts, and I feel like some of my books take a long time to grow from the initial seed, and other times like the whole idea comes to me. And obviously you can outline a book early on if you have a whole idea. If your book is a seed, you kind of have to like write a scene, let it sit, jump around, share something, talk about it, wait a year, like those books just take forever. So that really changes the path of each project too, for me.
Well, Tara, I like your idea of spreadsheets. I use them a lot, but not for writing. And it recently dawned on me on my third book I was writing, I had named a character of someone who was very unsavory in the previous book. And I could just well bet that some kid would pick that up and say, wait a minute, Tommy was a bad boy in book 2, and now you got him as a good boy in book 3. So that would help me keeping good and bad separated anyway. So.
Wonderful. And Gary, how about you? So you said this is the final one in your series. So I'm sure that has been its own challenge.
It's the 4th book of the Monster Pet series. I don't know if I can be done with these characters.
Good. She is finally at the zoo. So
I get sort of an honor. It's an honor to me to get to hang out with them. And it's actually kind of funny because we were talking about plotting, and I always thought I was a plotter, and I was like, oh, I'm a plotter and I'm not a pantser. But it's because I base a lot of this on dialogue. So I'll run conversations in my head, and then I'll use that conversation, and it'll create a kind of a spine of a scene or I don't know what you call it, like an action sequence, and then the rest sort of builds up around that. I was concerned when I had one book that I was selling and somebody was about like 10, I thought I would sell 10 in an event. And then I would say, oh, when I have 2 books, I'll sell 20. And when I have 3 books, I'll sell 30. And it didn't work out like that. And I realized that like to buy book 1, anybody can buy book 1. But to buy book 2, you either have to buy book 1 or have read book 1 already. And it's sort of, and it moves out. And I'm like, I'd read 100 of these books if I had the slightest chance that I would sell them after a certain point. Although at a lot of events I see my demo is mothers, aunts, and grandmas. And they say, I wish there was something like this for boys. I wish there was something like this for boys. Because girls will read anything, but if you put a girl on the cover, boys are like, that's a girl. I'm like, I don't know. But I just recently, I fell in November and I had a concussion. I kind of got knocked out. And so I'm recovering from a concussion. And I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Fireside Horror. They make audiobooks. They reached out to me to make audiobooks for the Monster Pet series. Cool. So they're doing that now. And they're doing just a fantastic job. I think 2 or 3 of the books are on Audible, but I've gotten a chance to listen to some of the samples. And it was the weirdest conversation I've ever been part of. I was talking to the guy and I said, let me just go through the manuscripts to make sure there's no mistakes or anything that's going to trip you up. And he's like, don't worry, we'll probably be a month before we start casting. I'm like, casting? Yeah, that's crazy. But yeah, I mean, the Monster Pets world, I call it anti-world building. Because in normal world building, you sort of drop a pebble into the water and the ripples go out. So if you say, oh, well, there's superheroes in the world now, how does that affect things other than, in Monster Pets, it's sort of the opposite. There are monsters like Dracula has a neighborhood. They have like a subdivision, but it only kind of affects the world. And I just like to look at some of the other kind of weird stuff that could be going on. But yeah, the thing about writing a series is you get committed to your earlier things. And in all the books, it's always just one character's point of view, and everything, she is present for everything that happens. Fourth book, I'm like, I really could be able to use to cut to somebody else. Like this one time in 4 books, I didn't because I wanted to sort of stay with the rules that I had sort of established, but I really could have used it.
Really great. And I that's, congratulations on getting audiobooks now for them too, because it's like just breathing new life into it and for the series for you.
It's so exciting.
Yes, for sure. And actually, in light of that, I have a follow-up question for Tara as well, since you said that this is a re-release of a series for you. Can you just for that's becoming more and more common for a lot of writers. Can you just for anybody in the audience kind of let them know a little bit of how that situation came up for you and what it was like to re-release them?
It was rough. Yeah, I published. So Curiosity Quills was they jumped on Pop Travel, and I published 6 books. I was on my 6th book to come out. So I was alternating between Beast World and Pop Travel. And then they started to crumble. So the publisher is a small press, and I think they tried to go too big and do too many things because they were really successful for a while, and we did really well with them. I did an anthology with them, and we got a ton of authors. And I don't know if you know who Pierce Anthony is, but he was in the anthology that I was in. I was so excited because he's one of my favorite writers. And so it was really getting big, but then I think it got a little too big for what they wanted to do. And so they had to pull back, and I think funding was a problem. And so we all got our rights back. And so I had to republish everything. They gave us everything back. Our covers, our rights, our books, all the electronics, the digital, everything. So it was like we didn't have to start from scratch, which was so thankful. But it took me like 2 years to get. I still have 1 left. I have Disposal, the 3rd one from Pop Travel that I need to redo. But everything else is published. And I'm working on the next one, and I'm going to have to branch out and start over again with my 4th Pop Travel. So we'll see how everything goes. But that's what happens in this industry. You never know how it's going to go. I've heard many small presses that fall because it is such it's such a hard life. Our publishing industry is tough, especially these days when everything is free, everything's online and everything's free. And, so it's hard to make a living or make it go.
And someone says in the comments, and it's exactly what I was going to say as well, that, really congratulations on getting, the rights back and, stepping up to the plate. And
I've heard many horror stories. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So wonderful.
I think a lot of people think once you get that publishing deal, once that's okay, it's it. Move on to the mansion. You're done. It's all good.
Right.
I met
All the
so
work's
many
over.
writers
Yeah.
that one of my wife's favorite writers had got this major book deal, and the editor left, and they were just like, "Meh, good luck with that," and they weren't interested. Or I've got friends who I have a friend who published the 1st book of a series, and the publisher just did nothing with it, but then wasn't interested in the 2nd, and because they still had the rights to the 1st, he couldn't take the 2nd somewhere else.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
in the mid 2000s, I had a full manuscript request from a big publisher, but like you said, Gary, the editor left and just orphaned it, and that was the biggest bummer.
I'm not sure if I could walk back from that one.
Yeah, that was rough.
That's when you send that evil sock after him.
Right, exactly. I'll show you.
When I tell my kids at school that I'm an author, they're like, "Oh, are you famous? Are you rich?" No, I'm not.
I had a kid
a
ask
good
me,
rule
"Have
of
you
thumb
sold
is
a
if
lot
you
of-"
have to ask if I'm famous, then I'm probably not.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
Yeah. It's like either you recommend.
I had a kid ask me,
I think
"Have
we
you
could
sold
probably
a
all
lot
go
of
on about our
books?"
life.
Oh, go ahead, Jen.
Sorry, we had a lot.
Zoom is tricky for when everybody talks at once, I've realized.
It is.
Go ahead, Jen.
Okay. So I think really. Earlier, I was trying to say, yeah, my first book was Orphan. My publisher was Egmont, and then Egmont closed. So it's not just small presses that are closing. We're seeing like mid-size or like large press imprints closing all the times, and editors. I'm on my 5th editor for book. I mean, it's just there's so much movement in the publishing industry. So that the whole idea, I think, that I had going into like, oh, you'll just have one agent and one editor, and like that'll be your experience. It's like I've had one agent, but many editors for sure.
And that's lucky in itself to have one agent. So that's
Yeah.
And Jason, you wanted to add?
I was going to say, you guys are talking about kids asking questions that you really can't answer. And one of them that I got asked was, have you sold a lot of books? And it's like, define a lot. What does that mean to you? 100, 500? What do you say?
My daughter's in high school and she got bored in class and was Googling stuff, and she Googled my name. And my books popped up and I popped up on my website, and she came up and she's like, oh my God, are you famous?
You're on the internet. Yeah.
That's what they say.
You have a website.
Daughter. Well, wonderful. Well, I've got another question for you. And this one I will ask, and as everybody's giving their answers, we have so far had 2 questions popped in, one the Q&A and one to the chat. So if anybody wants to take the opportunity to write any questions, now is a great time to do that because we'll have about 15 minutes of Q&A time. So this one I will, as I'm going, alphabetically making my way down the alphabet. So this one will be Jason first. So for our aspiring authors in the audience this evening, do you have any tips to help them navigate writing middle grade novels or the road to publication?
Sure. I have 3 things that I tell people, kind of 3 big things. And the first one is start something and finish something. I know a lot of writers who are hopping back and forth between a lot of books. And it's great. They have so many ideas, but they never finish anything. And I'm like, if you keep doing this, you're just going to burn a lot of time and you're never going to get to the end of what you're working on. So focus in on something and, just keep at it until you're done with it. And then the other thing that I tell people is find your people that are going to be encouraging to you. Ignore the naysayers. Ignore the people that are kind of putting down what you're doing, and really seek out and spend time with the people that are going to help you and encourage you. I have friends who are big readers. I have friends who aren't big readers, but they all came when I had a book launch party and supported me. And so really just find the people that are going to be encouraging to you. And also seek out fellow writers too. I'm in a writers group where some of us have known each other for over a decade now. And several of us have gotten published during this time. And we've just been there for each other and reading each other's work and critiquing each other's work all this time. So find other writers to help you hone your work and just to kind of share the journey with, and they're the only people that know really precisely what it's like to be going through what you're going through. And then the other last thing I would say is just don't give up. It took me 13 years to get my first book published. You just have to keep going and don't stop. And, just hold out hope that, the opportunity is going to be out there in some form or fashion. You just have to find it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, for sure. Finding a support group is very important, for sure.
And you mentioned you're in a SCBWI. Yes. If you want to write for kids, that is a great organization to join because you will find other writers who will support you. And frankly, they'll give you a lot of information, a lot of help that we need starting out.
Yeah, definitely a great place to find your kindred spirits. And if you are watching this and you are in Ohio, there's 2 chapters, the Central and Southern Ohio chapter that I'm saying I am the leader of. So, and then there's a Northern Ohio chapter as well. And every state has at least 1 chapter. So yeah, we're representing both here.
Yep.
So, wonderful. And Tara, how about you?
So I like to, when I'm writing, I want to get feedback, like Doug was saying. You want to get some feedback to know that it's connecting with your readers. And so whenever you're writing, definitely, like Jason said, definitely finish. And so you want to make sure that it makes sense too, though. So definitely find a critique partner. I have the best critique partners, and I found them by connecting with people online, with other authors, just like Jason said too, is that you connect with other authors. So I definitely suggest having a blog or connecting online if you can't connect in person, because I have so many friends, writer friends, that I have never met in person. I did make it a point to get over to Indiana and meet one of them there. But they are so helpful. They have their perspective, they have a reader's perspective, and then they have the shared experience of what we should probably, you're probably missing a beat here. You're probably missing you could use a scene here, something like that. Definitely want to connect. And that going to events is the other thing I was going to talk about. Is Ohioana was my first event many years ago, and it was so awesome. I had my first book. I thought it was going to be awesome. I think I sold like 2 books, but that's how it goes. I was very small back then too. But it was such a great experience. I met other authors. We talked about, I got so much information about how I could meet other authors, other events I should try, ways to market and stuff like that. So, and then be silly, be yourself. Don't worry about how you look or, how you come across to people. Just be yourself, and the readers will connect with you. So.
Love it. And I'm so happy that we were your first event. So yay.
Yeah.
Jen, how about you?
Oh, that's all really good advice. I would echo everything that's been said so far. And I would add, I guess, as a librarian turned writer, reading. Read, if you want to publish in this world right now, read a ton of what is also getting published right now. Like, I think it's really important, you can certainly learn from books published all over time, but the publishing industry is moving at a certain speed. And so if you want to fit in with what's coming out, you need to be reading, heavily from what's being published in the last 5 or so years. But what I love about books is books really serve well as mentor text. So as you're revising, when you're stuck on something, when your critique group says something's not working, look for what you think is an equivalent scene in another book. Grab it from a couple different authors. What does their climax look like? What does their breakup scene look like? And really examine that. I think there's so much that we can do just with other books. And that's what I love about writing. Like, a lot of this it's free. A lot of the things, the tools to improving your writing do not cost anything. You don't have, sure, you can take classes, you can get an MFA, but there's so much you can learn from other writers, from books, and from joining organizations that are relatively inexpensive.
Thank you. And Gary, how about you?
I don't want to pretend, I'm not going to pretend like to be the expert on getting published. I've had my struggles, but what my thought is always, if a publisher walked into your office right this minute and said, I need a book to publish right this minute, what do you got? Do you have something that you could hand over? I know a lot of people want to be writers, but don't want to write. Right? What do they say? Like, I want to have written. And and I mentioned that I had fallen and I had a concussion. And within a week, I was still having, in the point of the concussion, of cognitive mess up. I got the audiobook thing, which required going back through manuscripts and stuff. But I also got an invite for an adult horror thing. And that's actually happened a lot, where you get reached out to somebody and you're like, I'm not even sure kind of who I am right now. And I have to produce 50 pages within a month or two. So I definitely think that if you're going to write, and really do it. I know a lot of people say, well, I had this great idea for a book and I can't find how, you're doing 10 things at once. I mean, I'm guilty of that too. I've tried to be more professional and focused on that. But I definitely think there's so much you can learn just by doing it. And I mean, so yeah, that's a thing.
Definitely. Butt in chair, they call it. You can't do anything without that butt in
Words
chair.
on paper. Yes.
Yeah.
And Doug, how about you?
Well, a couple things come to mind. First of all, as I've talked with different authors and writers, we all are we're all different in our daily lives. We're all busy. We're either working part-time, full-time, retired, whatever. And finding time to write can be challenging. And my philosophy has been to be very flexible and open about when you can write and where you can write, and take advantage of an unexpected time. Some really subscribe to the fact that, I have to write between 3 and 4 just because that'll be my hour. It doesn't work that way for me. If I happen to find a 20-minute window, I'll just sit down and usually keep going with the thought I had previously. So to me, it's good to be flexible when you can sit down and write. Sometimes I can write for an hour and a half. Other times it might be just 10, 20 minutes. But if I get something down and moving forward, then it's progress. Another thing that occurred to me, I used to keep a pad of paper by the bed, and I might wake up in the middle of the night with this continuing idea of something I was working on, and I would jot it down for fear of forgetting it. Now I graduated to the phone. I'll just send myself an email saying, hey, don't forget to do this, this, and this. And so that works. And the last thing is I learned this from another author, actually, that wrote a very poignant book. And that is not to be defined or tied by timelines. Don't tell yourself that you're going to have that book published by the fall, or you're going to have that chapter written by next week. Look at the overall process and work the process. So sitting down for 20 minutes one day works the process to getting that chapter written by the following week or the following week. But don't, because I did that in the first book. I tried to do chapter by certain dates, and I was getting frustrated because I missed the dates. And so I started backing off and just started working the process, and the process gets you there. So
it's very good advice.
Can I say something to Doug?
Mhm.
Yeah.
My son plays baseball, and so I bring my writing and I do my editing while I'm watching the game.
very good.
You find your little pockets of
I
time.
appreciate that.
Wonderful. Well, we have a few questions that have come in. So for these, I'm going to let it be a free-for-all for whoever kind of wants to pop in with an answer. So I'm going to do a craft question here first. And that is, let me go back up to it, is if you start a book knowing what the end is.
Oh,
That might be a good kind of pantser versus plotter kind of question. Who kind of just jumps in by the seat of their pants, or who likes to make sure they've got, all their points on the roadmap first.
Yeah,
I don't-
I'm trying to think. I don't think I've started any book knowing the ending. But I usually discover it before I get to the actual end, so I'm not a total pantser.
I wrote for one of my books, I wrote a 30 or as most involved outline I've ever done. 20 or 30 points, the full thing from beginning to end. I think I may have made it to like point 3 before something else popped up and it was off and running. And I've got it around somewhere. It's just completely different. But I think it's nice to know an idea of where you're headed. But it's be more fun to be surprised. I want to be as I heard an actor say that the most enjoyment they ever get out of anything they've done is when they read that first script and they don't know what's going to happen. And I feel that way about my first drafts a lot of times. It's like, what are these crazy kids going to be up to this time? Who knows?
Yeah, I'm the same way. I like to kind of discover it as I go. I've tried the, insanely detailed plot outline with every scene mapped out. I just got bored. I felt like I wrote it already. I didn't want to write it then, I like that discovery. So as far as knowing what the ending is, I like knowing where the character is going to be kind of emotionally, situationally, where developmentally they're going to be by the end of the story, and maybe have in mind kind of like what the end scene, the climax is going to be, and some of the big major plot points along the way. But the other stuff I fill in as I go, which can be tricky, but that's how I do it.
I do that too. I do the major plot points and then fill it in as I go. But this latest book that I'm writing, I already knew the cliffhanger for the next book because it's
Excellent.
from a previous book. So that's exciting to me because it's like, oh, I know what's happening in the next book.
That's true. Yeah, you got to think about that with the series. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, where's this all going?
I had come to the end of my book, and I thought I was done, but then an idea popped in my head late one night, and so it had to become an epilogue because it was somewhat of a futuristic after the fact type of thing. So, and really the publisher said he liked that idea. He loves epilogues, so.
Cool. And a question that's in our Q&A, and I'm going to, it's specifically for one person, but I'm going to ask it for everybody because I think this is a really, good question for that so many people face. So Tara, one of your students is actually in the Q&A.
I told them all today, so it's great.
He is wondering how you balance teaching, writing books, and normal life, which is a perfect question for everybody because we all have, responsibilities, we want to write and all those things, but limited time. So, Tara.
Yeah, so it's been a crazy time. When I was subbing, it was a lot easier because I didn't have to grade as much and I had a lot more free time. Then when I started working full time, I have definitely cut back, but I do look forward to the summers off. So that's a big thing. And I just write when I can, like when my son has a baseball game. It's really just whenever I can write, I write. Whenever and then also I keep in practice by entering like short story contests. Like I just did a short story contest. So as much as I can write, and that also helps me think about how the next book, this is an inspiration, makes me think of something else for the book. So just managing and doing as much as I can. Yeah.
Anyone else have any suggestions or thoughts on that?
Michael Crichton, the guy who wrote Jurassic Park and one of my favorite books, Sphere, he was a doctor. And he said he used to carry around 3x5 cards in his lab coat. And he would, if he had an idea for a scene, or he would just write on the 3x5 card. And at the end of the day, he would take them out, put new 3x5 cards in. I'm doing a version of that on Notepad on my phone. And something pops in my head, I just make a note. And sometimes I think Stephen King said that writer's notebooks are where crappy ideas become immortalized. But I mean, sometimes later when you go back to it, you go, that was terrible. And you just dump it. And, but I think I've read somewhere that somebody said that writers are either writing or thinking about writing. So it's always like running in the back. It's like that software that's running on your computer and eating up memory. And it just, you work stuff out and stuff pops up and you go, oh, there we go. Now,
And I'm able to write full time right now, but I wouldn't say I get that much more writing done now than I would if I had, like, sometimes having things constraining your time can make you more productive with your time.
Yeah, if you're not,
Today I was like, I have a whole day open until this, and so I struggled to even get going until 11.
you have to be in the mood to write too. So you can't write just because you have time.
Right.
That's true.
Well, especially writing the kinds of stories that I write, and I think that some of you guys write too, where it is coming from a space of fun and wonder and adventure. And if you can't tap into that within your own mind at that point, then, I find I just cannot write. I just came off a period where I didn't write much of anything really for 3 months because that's just not where my head was. And, but now, the sun's coming out, things are opening up to some extent. So you start feeling better about things and you can kind of get back to where you need to be able to write. So I would say, don't put too much pressure on yourself to write constantly, be open to taking a break from it.
Yeah. And we do have one more little question that slipped in, so we'll do this one speedy before we wrap up. So we have someone would love to hear about what you're noticing in the lived experience, or the lived experiences of middle grade audiences today that differs from the middle grade experience, when you were that age. I can think texting is definitely one that wasn't around when I was middle-aged.
Yeah, social media. You are totally accountable for everything that you put out there, and we were hidden. We got away with a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I would think that's got to put a lot of pressure on kids today too. Really? But I would think a lot of the themes, at least in feelings and things, were that writing about now were still just as relevant at that age.
I think kids are the same on the inside, but a lot of outside things are different.
Each one of my books, I'm drawing upon something that I went through when I was that age, in the middle school age. And, I have the kids of my friends, be beta readers for my stuff. And I can just see it resonating with them. And the kids that I've talked to who have read my books after they've been published, I see it resonating. And I, same as what you just said, some things are universal, regardless of what era or what time you're living in, kids are going through the same kinds of things.
I think we have to respect the fact that these kids know things that we don't. And specifically, like in the beginning, Gary, when you were having speaker issues, your daughter came in and fixed it. And I had a situation in a classroom where I was struggling with the electronic whiteboard about something, and a kid jumped up, came up, flicked it, and was done. And it's like, okay, so you kind of have to respect that piece. So
I think once you can get something you can get your fingers on, like my daughter wants to be a YouTuber. And I didn't exactly sort of understand until I thought, well, make that she wants to be in a band or she wants to be an actor, and then it makes perfect sense. It's this generation's I want to be a rock star kind of, except that it's actually because of the sort of self-publishing aspect of being a YouTuber, you can't. Whereas before, I mean, you had to be signed on to be something, you know. So it's definitely it seems weird on the surface, but then it's not really. But then sometimes the kids will say, "Well, I like this boy and he doesn't like me back." You wouldn't understand. Like,
yeah, we've never been there.
Never been there. That's universal.
Yes. Well, this has been so fun. Before we head out, if you would all like to let us real quick know what you're working on next that we can look forward to from you. And it's okay if it's even just a nap after, you know, what's coming next for you. But hopefully there are some more fun books in the works.
Can I show my cover?
As we go alphabetically, it's now Tara's turn to go first.
Well, the latest thing I just published is my fourth unprincess story. My unprincess novellas are about girls that save themselves. They get into their own troubles and then they save themselves and they help other people along the way. And so that I just put out. But my fourth pop travel is I just love these books because they crack me up. I crack myself up and it's just, they're so fun to write. So that's my latest one I'm working on.
And as we're going, well, now we're back to the beginning of the alphabet. We've got Jen.
Okay. Well, I'm excited. My book isn't officially announced, but it's my first book set in Ohio. It's going to be set in Cincinnati, and it's a sports book about two girls whose dads are rival college basketball coaches in Cincinnati. I wonder where they could be coaching. So I'm excited. That'll be coming out in 2023.
Wonderful. Are you on a almost annual release schedule now for your books?
I had a couple that came out close together. This new one is going to be coming out with a different publisher, and there's a couple. There'll be a year in between, which will give me a nice little breathing room because I did not cook up a pandemic book baby, so I've got a little bit catching up to do.
It was a rough year. That's quite understandable. And Gary?
Yeah, it's actually funny because I use Ohioana as my annual publishing schedule. I make sure that the books are done and then in hand so that
like that.
And it's been I've been coming since 2015, so it's been pretty consistent. I have my cover here. I don't know if you guys can see it.
We can see it off and on. There's a little
my
more
next middle grade
flexibility.
is called Action Figures. It's about a boy whose action figures come to life. He shrinks down to like 3 inches tall. They go on this big epic adventure across the backyard.
Oh,
and,
cool.
So that's something I've been working on for actually a long time, and I'm hoping to have that. I think I'm going to stick with doing middle grade stuff at Ohioana. You know, so I'm really looking forward to having that done. My son is named the character in that, and he's been on me since he was little to get that book done because my oldest daughter, who helps with the electronics, was actually the main character's name in Monster Pets, Mina, who's from Dracula. So,
Hey, very good luck with that.
thank you.
And Doug?
I'm halfway through my third book, which is unnamed at this point. I had another interview recently where they asked about how you come up with the title. And I said, I usually have to wait till it's nearly done. And then I extract key things from the book. And then that generally leads to the title. But it's about an inner city boys baseball team and all of the character issues that surround that, social economic issues, attendance, perceptions by the teams they play about the inner city kids and, you know, the quality and so forth. So again, back to what I was saying earlier, I'm trying to keep it interesting and readable for kids. And I think I'll get there, but it's a little older book, little junior high, almost freshman type book. So.
Perfect. Well, good luck with that too. This is an exciting group of, you know, what everybody's working on. So Jason, how about you?
I'm working on the third book in this problem series. I had monster problems, super problems. This next one's going to be called time problems. And I'm working on it right now. The same laptop that I'm Zooming with you guys on actually is the same thing that I'm using to work on it. and may not be ready in time for next year's Ohioana. We'll see. If not, then the year after, hopefully. But this one is about a middle school girl who doesn't want to go from 6th to 7th grade. She's scared of the increased workload, the bigger responsibilities of being in a higher grade. And so she gets the magic pen and she makes one of her stuffed animals into a wizard that freezes the summer. So the summer between 6th and 7th grade will never end. It will just keep going and going and never go on to fall and school because she doesn't want to do it. And I'm having a lot of fun writing that right now.
It's like a lot of fun to write. So,
definitely.
Well, good luck to everybody with your projects. You are going to be so busy here, busy little bees behind the scenes with all this writing. So, and that means we'll just get to see you at another book festival, hopefully in the very near future. So, well, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today and all of the attendees. The time just flew by. I knew it would. But we had a robust panel here of 5, fun middle grade authors. And yeah, so this was a, quite a delightful hour here. So I just want to say a big thank you again to our panelists, Jenn Bishop, Gary Bittner, Doug Coates, Jason R. Lady, and Tara Tyler. A reminder that you can get copies of the books by each of our festival authors from the Book Loft of German Village at bookloft.com. And thanks again also to our festival sponsors and partners. And thank you all again for joining us this evening. Please check out the Ohioana website for all of this year's festival programming, and we will see you next year. And so thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Kathryn.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for having us.